Sam will not be coming tonight due to the weather, so we're gonna reschedule the Thursday stuff. That way we can also get out of here hopefully sooner as well. So we will skip the CIRSA stuff, for this evening. And we will move on to the second agenda item, which will be the marijuana regulation discussion. And, keep our comments to 3 minutes so everybody has enough time to speak. If you need to speak longer than 3 minutes, we can do so after everybody's spoken or said their piece, and then we'll come back around, circle back. I guess we'll just start with Dan. Do you have anything to present to us?
I can give a very brief introduction if that will be helpful
Please.
for this discussion. I won't go over the proposed ordinance that was brought up at the meeting last time in detail. The board's seen it at least 2 times at this point. But that's the reason we're here today. After discussion of that ordinance and public comment, the considerable public comment last week, the board moved to postpone consideration of that until next meeting. And following that discussion, there was some request to bring back more information to kind of guide further discussion around that today. The 3 areas that we have in particular, and I'm happy to answer questions on any number of other topics. The 3 particular areas were mentioned. One was setbacks from key public zones. Currently under the marijuana ordinance, no marijuana license can be issued for a premise that is within 500 feet of any property zoned P public. As defined or as described in the memo here in our ordinance, P public is a pretty broad zoning. It's intended to identify and perpetuate the existence of public parks, playgrounds, recreation facilities, and public and quasi-public buildings, whether publicly owned or leased. Within the P public, it basically includes any town-owned facilities. So it would include parks, it would include the municipal services building, it would include the library, it would also include the wastewater treatment plants, it would include, we have at least 1 detention pond that's zone P public. So there's a lot of different uses that fall within that. So I kind of put that, or I put that definition here in the memo, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. That language that was in the ordinance passed came from the proponents, the initiative proponents. So it was in the original survey, saying 500 feet from P public zone properties. This skip down to the 3rd one in my memo, which is the role of the Board of Adjustment. Question was asked, was raised by some members of the public during public comment, and then the question is asked about whether the proposed variance process inappropriately expanded the role or exceeded sort of the purview of the Board of Adjustment. And so I put in some information in the memo about variances, and really the Board of Adjustment its entire purpose is to hear and decide. It's to have quasi-judicial hearings, to listen to evidence that pertain to people's property and make decisions. That might be a request for variances that currently goes through the Board of Adjustment. It would also be appealed in any decision of a municipal planning official. So, for instance, if Cody denied some request or well, I would say pretty much if Cody denied some request, that would be appealed there to the Board of Adjustments. They would have a hearing, they would hear the evidence, and then they have very specific criteria that are clearly laid out in the land use code. In this case, the reason the variance process seems very appropriate. One is it's already been used. The marijuana code includes setbacks. There are various feet from various uses, and the variances that are allowed within our land use code specifically mentions variances sought for relief from dimensional and numerical standards of the land use code. So the way the marijuana code works is it actually put those setbacks in the land use code and it applies them to marijuana licenses. So the Board of Adjustment would have to hear variance requests for the use of the property. The issue that this ordinance is intended to deal with is how does that apply to the local licensing authority? And really this licensing authority is looking at the same numbers, the same property, the same everything. So this was an opportunity to have just one process for hearing requests for variances with a very clearly defined process in the land use code. It included the variance and Board of Adjustment process in the packet. So whether the Board of Adjustments hears items that are referred to it, and they can be varied by ordinance. So I think if the board decides that this is appropriate for the Board of Adjustment, it would be legally a property in the role of the Board of Adjustment, if the board decided it wanted to allow that. The third item was a discussion of setbacks from schools and daycare facilities. Within the ordinance, it requires that no marijuana license be issued for any location that's within 2,000 feet of a property that's used for a school. And it then further defines school as a public or private preschool, including a licensed daycare, or a public or private elementary, middle, junior high, etc. The town of Wellington is not a very large town, so 2,000 feet is a pretty considerable distance. When you look at the map of the town of Wellington, and Cody's got some maps that we can pass out for discussion of this. Basically have 3 primary schools that triangulate to cover a large part of the town. And then daycares are spotted throughout the town. There's a number of daycare centers or preschools, and they kind of define each other. They're not clear whether they're preschool facilities. And then there are a number of home daycares. And so they're kind of spotted throughout town. Cody ran some numbers based on what we've been able to find in Colorado Shine, which is a statewide database of daycare facilities. And instead of the idea was to look at how many daycare facilities are within 2,000 feet of a C3 property. So we kind of went the opposite direction to see how, looking at all the C3 properties, and there's approximately 8 daycare licenses in the town of Wellington that are within 2,000 feet of C3 properties. And we've got some maps that don't show the daycare facilities specifically. They're actually intended to show the school distances. And the reason we chose to not show all daycare facilities on the maps was simply privacy. Many of those facilities are home daycares. And so I thought it would know better to, the purpose of the maps is to give an idea of where the properties that are zoned C3 are located and give an idea of how big of a circle 2,000 feet. Also, we have maps that show 1,500 feet and maps that show 1,000. We have 500? No. Okay. So there's some different size setbacks from those schools. But it gives a good sense on what that might look like if those distances were changed. With a lot of information, I think I've provided. I hope I was able to answer the specific questions that were raised by the board. But have to answer any other questions, including any questions about public comment last time. Since the last meeting, I have received contact from another individual who was there, who requested that the board consider removing all setbacks from residential zone properties and some other changes, and I haven't had time to get that to the board.
Thank you, Dan. Cody, could you hand out those maps? Please.
And the maps are in on paper form, not in the packet, because they are very. One includes a draft based on the proposed land use code. So is the zoning.
This is just one.
Ideas. Okay. And then the others are, I won't say estimates of the zoning of the setbacks. And so we didn't want to include them in the packet to have any parties looking at these maps and then saying, well, this map shows that this is very much a draft, an internal document. The public is more than willing to see it. We're happy to show it to anybody, but we didn't really want them published on the website. The danger with publishing maps like this is that they end up floating around, and then there are a lot of different maps that purport to say the same thing. And then we have concerns when we might have an applicant come in, they will say, like I said, they'll say, well, this map shows that I'm outside. Well, this map is very much an estimate. Be more demonstrative to give the board an idea of what these setbacks might look like.
Yeah, and thanks for that introduction. There's a nice large unattractive watermark on this. And I would also like to, at the conclusion of the work session, this topic, I'll collect these just to help keep down the version history and the number of documents floating around. So these are for your use in this meeting. We'll round them up at the end and make sure that we control the number of versions out there.
You want to,
Yeah, I'll do
why
that.
don't you describe the maps?
I'd be
Please.
happy to do that. So you've got a couple different maps in there, some kind of disclaimers. The maps with the bubble diagrams showing various setback distances. Based on today's existing zoning, the town is in a different process to update the town's official zoning map following land use code adoption. The bubble diagrams with distances don't reflect the proposed zoning recommendations. Those haven't been approved. We don't have those base layers built into our GIS data right now. GIS is Geographic Information System. It's a phenomenal software program that we use for mapping. But I did include in your packet the recommended zone map with the planning commission vetted December 5th as a reference tool. So you can see the properties that the planning commission is currently recommending for some changes, and you can kind of compare that to the various setback distance examples. With regards to, so that's the zoning piece, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I know it's hard to look at the scale map for parcel specific information. You've got four maps showing setback buffers and distances. There's one titled base map. That's just showing the residential buffers and the P public districts. I wanted to give that as kind of a base reference because those, I've currently not heard any recommendations or requests from any applicants on changing that specific provision. And then the next three maps show the various setback buffer distances at 2,000, which is the current ordinance language approved by the voters. We heard from different applicants to reduce this by this much. As Dan alluded to, we're just showing kind of order of magnitude. If all of the school buffers were reduced from 2,000 feet to 1,500 feet, you can see what that might look like as an order of magnitude. And then we show 1,000-foot setback as well. We do have, there's two commercial preschools in Wellington. They're both on properties zone C3 currently. And that zone is not recommended for any changes, but you can see those, the boundary on the, those circle buffers, you can still see it. The others kind of clouded all of the buffers into one buffer. The preschools remain separate, so they have a circle. Any questions on high level framing of what the maps are and what you have in front of you?
How many locations at this time do we have available for applicants to successfully apply and achieve opening a dispensary? From looking at all of this, what do we have now? With the buffer is still set at the 2,000 feet. What do we have available
Yeah,
as far as
I'd
properties go?
refer you to the 2,000-foot buffer map that identifies the existing or the existing ordinance language for residential buffers, park buffers, and school and preschool
Right, but
buffers.
there's all this too.
Again, this map doesn't include the home daycares, which would also have an impact on that.
So everything's perfect.
And if the question is where on this map can applicants currently?
Yeah.
Essentially,
6th Street corridor.
if you look at the 6th Street corridor, there's a wedge there. Directly above the 0 in 2023 on this map, that's an area that is essentially the only area.
That was just annexed.
Yes.
Yes,
So
part of that
yes,
was
you're-
just annexed, yes, that's correct.
And then what is the maximum distance from one dispensary to another?
500 feet.
Got it. So is there a possibility of two opening in this open area on 6th Street?
I do not believe so.
Yeah, based on the ordinance adopted by the voters, I don't believe that there's a possibility of meeting all the setback requirements and zoning.
So does this take into account all of the available property to purchase to annex into town? Because I know there's a bunch on Highway 1 that is for sale. Does that take into account the possibility of them purchasing that property and bringing it into?
Yeah, so these maps are just showing current town
Got
boundaries. It doesn't include any future annexations that can be considered by the town.
I'm just thinking possibility.
Because at any point when property is annexed, as part of the annexation, the zoning is set as well, so there's a number of factors there.
So taking it from the 2000 to the 1500, where does that open it up?
That'd be that Sixth Street corridor down further south. Also on Sixth Street, the Water Lily Buttercup area. And then I believe the area on Cleveland,
So differences.
down by River of Life over there by Meridian Trust.
Have we gotten any business feedback? I know we've had people come and speak at the meetings when the last one was approved, and it was a request by some of the businesses that they were concerned about the businesses, about a dispensary opening up next to them. Have we had any further communication from any of these businesses in this area about pros or cons, for or against? Have we had any feedback?
I've not received any business specific feedback. One thing I will share. There are some businesses and subdivisions that are subject to private covenants for owners association. They may or may not have private stipulations on that to address their concerns.
I think that's most of the information we
Yeah.
have, but we're happy to answer absolutely any questions, so if you want to.
Hey, Cody, I have a question for you. I want to first thank the rest of the Board of Trustees and the mayor for allowing the extension, so I have a
Yeah.
chance to ask questions as well. There were a few questions asked that I also had for the follow-up, and one was the amount of available properties. Did we receive information back as far as what Mayor Pro Tem McDonald had asked about what daycares could be bought out if setbacks could be changed? Is that a possibility?
Well, and that was what I alluded to with the information that Cody was able to put together. What we tried to do was figure out. If you look at all of the C3 properties in town, which is the only zone where a marijuana facility could be open, we tried to look at how many daycares are within 2,000 feet of it. And so thinking that if somebody wanted to purchase a C3 property that happened to be blocked by a daycare, I say blocked by a daycare, be within 2,000 feet of daycare, and you found 8 licensed daycares. Those might be preschools or daycares that are currently located within 2,000 feet of C3 zoned districts.
Do those also fall within the 1,500?
Seven of the
Seven of the 8.
Yeah, if I can clarify, Mr. Sapiens' comment too, just, or add some additional context to it. The 8 is reference to, currently licensed home daycares. There are also 2 commercial facilities, commercial licensed daycares that are within that 2,000 feet. All of our schools are within 2,000 feet. When you reduce if the setback buffer were reduced to 1,500, the schools and the commercial centers would still be impacted. It reduces the number of home daycares from 8 to 7, so still a significant impact. Keeping in line with the buffer distances on the maps, if you reduce that to 1,000 feet, schools and commercial preschools are still impacted. For currently licensed home daycares would still be impacted.
Do we know if, and this might be something that maybe Trustee Daly could answer, being involved with early childhood. Does allowing that use and changing these setbacks, does it affect the ability of a daycare center to open? So it's not like a pre-existing.
This setback only applies to the ability for a marijuana store to get a marijuana license.
Got it.
If a marijuana store were to open in anywhere in town, retail, if they got a license, a daycare could open across the street.
They can.
And that would not
Got it.
then affect the existing license.
Perfect.
So it does not prohibit any additional daycare from opening anywhere in town. This is really saying that schools are affected or that home daycare licenses are affected. Actually, it's the opposite. It's 8 home daycares exist within 2,000 feet of C3 properties, affecting the ability of somebody to get a marijuana license at the C3 property.
But
It
not
doesn't go
affect
the other way around.
daycare opening of
No,
the facility.
yes.
Got it. This is regarding the Board of Adjustments, page 27 in our packet. There is a list of findings for approval. How many of those findings need to be satisfied in order to get approval on a variance from the Board of Adjustments?
All of them.
So every single one has to be satisfied.
That's the standard for review, and it's titled findings for approval. So a positive finding is typically satisfied for all of those. I believe one of the findings is substantial justice is done. In a number of instances, a Board of Adjustments might weigh some of the findings differently than others. And sometimes the substantial justice component, they said, this isn't hurting anyone, and we think it's fair and reasonable to the applicant to allow their request. And that has been documented in a number of cases, and not only in Wellington, but in my other jurisdictions as well.
Got it.
I have a question. off that.
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
As an example of finding of fact, can you kind of share what the findings were for the asphalt plan to allow it to go with those variance requests? Like, what were those findings of facts?
The findings are the same.
Findings are the same, but what, I guess, what was the census of the board for those findings of fact?
I'm being careful because that
Yeah.
subject matter is not on your agenda for discussion tonight, but I think in general, language when considering the findings for approval for a variance request, it's a case-by-case basis. The Board of Adjustments looks at the information relative to that particular request. In the examples that Mayor Shosse alluded to, one of those recent Board of Adjustment cases looked at existing zoning that had been in place for 20 years in the town of Wellington. And when the town updated its land use code in April of 2022, the rules on setback distances between incompatible zone districts changed. And so these were properties that were fully vested with the uses identified in those zone districts. And then a new regulation was added that impaired 80% of the usable land area in those districts.
Okay.
And so that was a basis for, it was one of the findings that the board weighed very heavily in that recent decision.
Okay. Go ahead.
So if a decision of the Board of Adjustments was not a desired outcome of, say, one, the people, or two, the applicant, so I would say Board of Adjustment approved a decreased setback and the people are unhappy. And the other one would be the applicant was denied a board of approval and saying, no, you can't have this specific setback. That decision is appealed to the Laramie County District Courts, correct? So in that decision and removing it from the town's no longer a town decision, it gets transferred over to Laramie County District Courts, which pretty much removes the town from any ability of having any further say after that, correct?
Yes and no. And Mr. Sapiens is probably better to speak to the legalities, but I think there's maybe clarifying what you mean by the town's say, because a variance decision is uniquely based on that particular property request and what they're asking for. And an appeal is typically challenged on procedural elements as opposed to whether or not it was the right decision to make.
Yeah, a decision of the Board of Adjustment, as you said, can only be appealed to the district court. And that has to be done within 28 days. It can be done by pretty much anybody who feels that the process was improper, whether it was the applicant or a member of the public. But it's really about the process, and it's whether the applicant received proper due process. The only evidence that's looked at in that appeal is the record that was created. And that's one of the reasons that the Board of Adjustment has so many rules. The Board of Adjustment's sole role is to hold quasi judicial hearings. It's looks at the record that is in front of it and nothing else. When that is appealed, the first step is certifying that record. That record is then sent up to the court, who also only looks at that evidence. And so it's really about whether the hearing was fair, whether it was just, whether the applicant or the public's due process was protected, and whether the decision was based on the evidence in the record.
The facts
So
of
if-
finding, correct?
If their findings of fact were
Got it.
based on the evidence in the record. So if you said if it's something that the town doesn't want, well, that's not in the record. It's looking at just the evidence that's there. And that's why we have so many processes around it. It is also one of the reasons why I thought that in thinking about variances for marijuana, one of the reasons that the Board of Adjustment was in my mind a good route to go is because as a body, that's what it does. If there are procedures that are set, there's a very clear findings. So essentially, if a decision is made whether to support or not support a variance, if it goes before the Board of Adjustment, it's traditionally they've done a very good job and their decisions have been where I think defensible. So if somebody did appeal, they would not be able to clearly find that due process was not preserved or that the findings were not based on the evidence in the record. But yes, it essentially goes out of the town's hands. At that point, the town would defend the decision of the Board of Adjustment based on its procedures.
And who defends that? Would you, our town attorney, be the one that goes to
Or
court?
our contract attorney, one or the other, depending on the circumstances, but yes,
Got it. So it could still cost the town money either way.
it would, yes, either,
Got it.
and that would be on any appeal.
Yeah, and the question would be like, even if, for example, I know one idea that's been floated was the Board of Trustees, when we don't hear variances for anything else, but if we were, it would be the same process. So if we made a decision, the appeal would still go to the county court.
Yes.
And we would still have to pay to defend that, regardless of who was making that determination.
That's correct, and that's really the case with any quasi judicial hearing before the Board of Trustees, whether it's a liquor, when it sits as the liquor board or in some other role. If an applicant or a member of the public decided that the process wasn't fair, whether it wasn't based on the record, that appeal would go to district court, and that would essentially the appeal process would be the same.
Do we know of many municipalities that have altered a vote of the people in regards to this after a vote has been done by the citizens? Do we know many municipalities that have altered that?
Many municipalities include home rule municipalities. Many home rule municipalities include in their charter language that the city councils, boards of trustees, or I guess board of trustees, the city town boards, city councils can't change by ordinance an item that's been voted on by the people. And that's for example, in the city of Fort Collins, anytime people get confused sometimes about what a citizen initiative does, but in Fort Collins, for instance, I believe it is in the town, in the city charter, that if the citizens vote on something, city council cannot amend it. But in the town of Wellington, as a municipal or a statutory municipality, it is within the purview, within the power of the Board of Trustees to change any ordinance. So the initiated ordinance was an ordinance. And it specifically included language saying that the Board of Trustees could amend or repeal that ordinance after January 1st, 2023. So I have not looked whether other municipalities have changed, but for those that can change, I would assume they have. Especially, in regard to what we're looking at here and what was proposed with regard to variances and these other things. I think these are sort of procedural steps, and I think they're very would be appropriate to sort of clean up what was passed. But in other cases, I think you'll find that in many places, city councils and town boards don't change anything that the voters vote into effect, but that's because they're legally prohibited from doing that.
So if we were not to change, say, we were to vote to keep it as what the people voted on, that is the ordinance, who would hear the variance? Would it be the legal licensing authority?
So if no change were made
Mhm.
on this point, and that the current situation is that the marijuana ordinance that was passed by the voters did two things with these setbacks. It said that the licensing authority could not issue a license for a property within these setbacks. And it also said that the town's zoning code is changed to include these. So currently, the Board of Adjustment does hear requests for variances, and it has. And in fact, there's a member of the public here who has gone through that process to request a variance from the Board of Adjustment. And in that case, Though the variance was recommended, the Board of Adjustment turned down or declined to issue a variance. However, when that applicant went to the Board of Adjustments and started with going to our planning department to request a variance, the first thing that came out of our planning director's mouth, I've been told many times, pretty much at the beginning of every conversation, was that though the Board of Adjustment could hear a request for a variance from the land use code, that decision had no effect on the decision of the local licensing authority. So we're left with a situation where the Board of Adjustment could actually currently issue a variance. And so a party could apply, be issued a variance from the setback distancing. So under the land use code, the use would be allowed. However, they then go to get a license and they go to the marijuana licensing authority, and the marijuana licensing authority then says, no, it's within the setback. And they say, well, we got a variance, and the licensing authority says, that's the land use code. Board of Adjustment has no authority to vary the marijuana code. So we have a situation right now where there is inconsistency, and I think that creates the inconsistency, the lack of clarity, creates a real risk of also being sued for violation of due process rights potentially, because if they've received a variance, yet that has no legal effect, that can cause a problem. So I think if the board's intent were to not allow variances at all, if the board desires to not allow the Board of Adjustment to hear any variance requests to vary these distances at all, I would recommend that the marijuana code be changed to clearly state that. One way or another, there's a lack of clarity in our current marijuana code.
So is it because, is it because it was Wellington specific and how that code and ordinance was originally written? How are other municipalities handling a situation like this? Do they not hear variances?
This situation is very specific to the ordinance that was initiated by the voters and proposed.
Got it.
And you were, several members of the board were not on the board at that time. Now, one of the challenges with the proposed ordinance that was received all the petition signatures, it included references to obsolete state statutes. It said that marijuana or Wellington must follow statutes that had been repealed because it was a very poorly worded ordinance that we weren't sure could be enforced. And in fact, that's why it was contested. That's why there was a hearing that said that the petition was insufficient because the language was so bad. That led to a couple of lawsuits. And in settling those lawsuits, the town tried to stick with what people had signed on to. A number of people had signed petitions to bring this ordinance forward. And so the goal was not to fix everything, but to at least fix the big things. And this is one of those items that was in that proposed ordinance that was written by proponents of marijuana, not by the town staff, not by anybody in our office. So this problem is very specific to the language that was proposed.
Got it.
Excuse me, and this was written by the marijuana group?
It was proponents of the marijuana. ordinance,
Right,
yeah.
okay,
I'm
so
not
they
sure.
actually did all the writing, all the setbacks, everything else.
Most of the setbacks that are in the past ordinance were included in the original.
Okay.
The 2,000 feet from schools, the 500 feet from park, 200 feet from residential. The difference from what was proposed originally and what was as part of what was changed as part of the settlement was the definition of schools in the original ordinance. That was the people signed petitions for. The definition of schools included preschools. And then everything else. It didn't include licensed daycares. However, under the state statutes, there is no separate licensing for preschools and licensed daycare. So there actually would have been, we probably would have been in the same situation where preschools were 2,000 feet. So what's a preschool? Well, maybe a daycare is a preschool. Many daycares might be. So at least in the current way it was finally issued, included licensed daycares. It's clear. It's clearer than the old. But yes, all of the distances, all the setbacks were in the original ordinance.
Right,
Town staff.
and that's the one that they petitioned for,
Petitioned.
they got passed.
They petitioned for, and then went to district court, and as part of the settlement, that language carried over and was
What
submitted to the voters and voted on.
and what voters voted on.
Right,
I apologize, that's the procedural history of all this. It's kind of have to understand how we got to where we are.
And I want to verify again through trustee Wiegand's ask at that last meeting I was unable to attend. He said that there is no change to the definition of schools in this new proposed ordinance, correct? It's still under the same exact listing.
Yes, and the ordinance that's been discussed, that was before the board last week, the definition of school is unchanged.
Got it. So we really don't have an option. It has to be discussed, is kind of what I'm catching and understanding in all of this, is there has to be a legal route for any entity, whether that is a dispensary, whether that is a brewery. At the end of the day, what it's coming down to is there has to be a legal route for a business to file a grievance, pretty much is what I view kind of a variance as is.
As I said, I think there is another option. I mean, the other option, I believe what's required, what really needs to be done by the board is to provide clarity. There are two options. One of those, there's more than two options.
That's where it's gonna like.
One option that's before you would be to say no variances of any kind would be allowed. That would provide clarity. If that's what the board wants to do, that would be an option. The option that was presented was to create a process that kind of fits with other land uses where these numerical distances might not make sense to provide that variance. Certainly another option would be to change the setback distances, which would. I mean, I still think you need the clarity on the.
Are we legally
variance
protecting ourselves if we say no variances?
I clearly speak from my personal opinion. I do not think we should be telling one category of business, you don't have the same rights as every other category of business. Like everyone else in the entire town has the right to. Now, it doesn't mean they'll get the variance. They have the right to go to the Board of Adjustments and say, hey, here's my case. I'd like to have relief from whatever my circumstances are. So, I mean, technically, I guess we could put it, I don't think that's wise, and that's not something I personally would be supportive of, because regardless, again, whether I think anything about a business, good, bad, or otherwise, we all have the same rights, we all live in the same country. So I think that I like what has been proposed, and I think clarifying what the Board of Adjustments does, we're not, giving power that's the same thing that they have for other categories of business. Like, we don't hear variance on anything. Yeah, nothing at all. We've never heard of variance. Right. And so this would be all of a sudden saying, well, in this case, we are going to hear a variance versus saying, let's run this through the same process. And what I see this as doing is, again, this does not go to the licensing authority and say, you now have to approve this license. It just said simply the setbacks that they specifically went to for variance on are considered fulfilled. So like if they went in for variance for like the 2,000 feet on a school, that got approved, and then they were in violation of the 500 feet from public, then the license authority is going to say, no, you're in violation of this other one. So it's not like the variance from the one carries over to everything else. They have to apply for very specific variances. And then if circumstances change before they've gone through their licensing, well, then they may have to go through that process again. But again, that's the same process that's afforded to every other person in the town. And I think that for me, that's the consistency that needs to be given. And again, I appreciate that we need to have clarity, because it is very unclear. Well, this got approved, but somebody else can deny it. It's like, well, no, they can deny it for other reasons, but they cannot deny it for a reason I just got approved for it. And I think that's the route I would suggest that we move forward with.
Can I maybe build off trustee Dieter on that one?
Yeah, shoot.
Well, the Board of Trustees oversees the liquor licensing authority, but we chose to not oversee the marijuana licensing authority. Would it be possible for the Board of Trustees to oversee the variance requests instead of the Board of Adjustments, since we were voted in by the voters instead of?
The reason that I didn't go that route. Yes.
Okay.
Start with yes.
Okay.
If the Board of Trustees wants to take on that role, absolutely, there we can create a process, but we'd have to create a whole new process.
Understood. That was my question.
What's the good, bad, and the ugly on that?
So, well, and that's something that I will say, I've had more people reach out to me and specifically request that it remain with their elected officials. So, and that is something I've heard over and over and over again, is the Board of Trustees should be hearing a variance on the marijuana thing, because it is so there's a lot of conflict that revolves around it. And the one thing that I have heard regularly when people have reached out to me is they don't feel it should be assigned to appointed officials. They think it should be an elected official because you were elected to represent. While I understand elected officials appoint the Board of Adjustments, well, and all of our boards in general, but I still, that didn't work when I tried to explain it to some people, is that, well, we appoint them and that didn't matter because apparently we haven't appointed all of them thus far. And we're newly elected officials into this position, a lot of us are. It's not that I have not heard a lot of comments and stuff like that from the public. I have. I just am trying to figure out how we work with what the voters voted on. We don't dismantle the ordinance that the voters could very well have been the only reason people voted for it was that 2,000-foot setback from preschools, daycares. I mean, that's what triggers in my head. I want to protect my children. But I don't know, the question a lot of the time is not the safety that happens on inside the building. A lot of the safety discussions that come to me are the safety outside of the building, the safety of the businesses surrounding that building, property safety, children being exposed. I know that the public zoning for the detention areas, I know we have one detention area that we host town events in town. That is a public space. We have another area that has a backstop and a detention pond installed to practice sports. A lot of our areas here in town, all of our recs, they use detention areas when they practice and have practices for all the team sports here in Wellington. So that's kind of maybe something we have to look at too. Is this something that we want to hand over to Board of Adjustments? Or is this something that needs to remain with the legal licensing authority or the Board of Trustees?
Well, I guess the next question is how many variances do either of these want to see? Because the real issue there is a setback concern. So is that a discussion that the board is willing to have or not? Because we've gone back and forth that we're not going to talk about the setbacks. And then we say, sit here and talk about setbacks. So are we talking about adjusting the setback?
No,
I'm not gonna vote for a change in setbacks.
Neither am I.
The fact is, you know, I think Mr. Donnelly's point was 100% on the mark, which is that there, if any single one voter could have shot this down and we wouldn't have it at all. So I think we need to stick with the character of what the voters went with here and stick with what the setbacks are. Now, I think a lot of the reason for that and having these large setbacks is because we don't want to be a Garden City. We don't want to be a North Side Fort Collins. We don't want to be these things. We don't want a whole boatload of these, right? I think that's very much the intention behind what the voters' motivation was behind that. So, you know, I would say, I personally would not be in favor of changing setback.
I'm in favor of what was proposed. I think getting clarity, getting a fashion in which they can seek an ordinance. And then it can actually be acted on. Where right now they're stonewalled, they can't do anything. I believe that's the best way to move forward in my opinion.
I fully agree with the ordinance as proposed. I fully agree with that.
It's not going away from what the voters said. It's just giving a clear path for a business to submit for a variance that can actually be acted on.
question, and I think I asked that the last time too. How much can they change going through the variance part? On the setback, can they go 20 feet, 10 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet,
Depends on
whatever?
depends on what they're requesting, and if it meets the findings for approval, then
It has to be findings.
Can we give some type of direction to the Board of Adjustments to say, you know,
The fully separate entity from us.
yeah, understood.
decision needs
I
to
just
be based on
wouldn't-
the record.
I wouldn't want to see a variance get approved that is 500 feet or something like that, and then all of a sudden a precedent's been set where that's expected going forward.
It needs to meet the
It needs to be findings of fact.
findings. I think if somebody came forward and said the 2,000 feet isn't applicable, and you want a variance to go down to 1,500 feet, and they met the findings of fact, that would Under our current variance land use code, where variances work, that would be allowed. If it met this, I mean, that's not to say it's going to be, and
Yeah.
it's not to say, perhaps it'd be easier to get 20 feet than it would to get 500 feet, but. No, you can't really.
I have a question. Okay, so I would assume that the state statutes for marijuana licensing have very specific setbacks. Ours exceed them. Are there minimum setbacks
I don't know that.
regarding any of these items? Because at minimum, all of our licensing requirements have to meet state licensing requirements. So
That's
my,
a minimum though.
yeah,
That's
well,
the
we would have to
minimum.
at least meet the state requirements.
Right.
Above and beyond, or I would assume ours are, because ours are above that.
Right.
So I guess my
Schools
question
are
is,
one of the ones.
so my question is that if there was a variance that was approved, but it was beyond what the state requirement was, what happens in that scenario?
I don't know that there are
Okay,
extensive setbacks, and I'm actually looking that up right
Okay.
now in the state.
okay, that was.
Really, that's about local jurisdiction, local control, and. And I'm with a quick search, I'm not finding it.
Sure,
So
I didn't
I don't
see
think
that.
that is I don't think that is,
Okay.
it's really a local setback.
I just want to make sure that anything that we're saying, if Board of Adjustment can approve this and we'll recognize that within our local licensing, and then somehow that's in conflict with state statute, then we're gonna be in trouble. So that gives us a whole nother level of conflict. So I guess that's something I want to flag as a concern.
Yes.
One thing that I would point out, just having overseen and prepared staff reports and defended decisions on multiple variances over the years. The very first finding for approval is that the applicant has to demonstrate that the specific provision that they're referencing that limits their ability to conduct their business significantly deprives their right and from all reasonable use of the property. In the context of this marijuana topic, marijuana is only allowed in the C3 zone district. The C3 zoning allows a broad range of commercial uses. And so that very first finding is going to be very difficult to overcome for any applicant when the Board of Adjustments is looking at finding number one or letter A, whichever the case may be. Does this regulation on the setback deprive the applicant of all reasonable use of their land? I've seen that go a number of different ways on a Board of Adjustment, but it's a really high bar to overcome and demonstrate that all reasonable use of a property zone C3 has been damaged by one particular use or one particular setback. So some perspective, that's a subjective question. That's why the Board of Adjustments is the body that's identified to hear those cases, but that would be one of the questions that they're tasked with every single case.
That actually brings
Thank
the
you.
question of whether, so we're talking about C3 is the only possible zoning permitted. I don't know if it's within our purview to allow other districts. It's come up before to allow light industrial. That's been something that's been brought up to us before.
Changes the.
Changes how.
Voter-
you know,
Okay. That's come to us before. I thought I would mention it, but is
You
there?
could, I mean, you could. The answer is you could, yes.
Not interested,
Okay,
but
and the only
wanna-
the reason I bring it up, and the only reason I bring it up, because there are plenty of properties outside of those setbacks or in Bonfire and in Fox Elder parks. That's why I have to acknowledge that, because if the setbacks are the major issue. I feel like it's worth mentioning, but I agree, but I just have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, well, the other
The
option
question is
too.
the setback.
No, and you make a good point. The other option as well is people do have the ability to, and we've had people come to this board and request a change of zoning. So a property owner could find a property that meets setbacks, and again, you're not guaranteed to get a change of zoning, but there are other avenues that are open. If they find a property that's in a place that makes sense, and they can come and request a change to a different zoning. And I would agree with, again, I want to bring clarity, because again, as I've said, I think there needs to be a clear path forward. The marijuana shop should have the same rights as any other business to appeal if there's rules keeping them from doing what they want to do. I understand the concerns about decisions that the Board of Adjustment will make, but I mean, we don't step in any other variance that they do. So it's not, I would not be okay with us saying, well, in this case, we're gonna add in these extra restrictions on what you can and can't do. We appoint people. I think it's important we be wise in appointing people, because you gotta have people that are looking at, okay, what does the code say? But they're also, that's why we have a board of adjustments, that's human side of saying, okay, the reasonable thought as I'm looking at these restrictions, is it reasonable to do what they're requesting? And again, that's why we have the board of adjustments, and I think that's important. So I think this does a good job of giving that clarity. We as a board had the discussion, or I guess it was our prior board, maybe, that had the discussion about marijuana licensing authority. I don't remember anymore. It's been a long time. We had that discussion, right? Okay, it was us. Okay. We had the discussion about whether we should sit as a marijuana licensing authority. And at that time, our board decided that no, we felt it was best to bring in someone with expertise. So I don't think it would be wise in this one situation to say, okay, well, we want to take on this one part. If we're going to trust people that we've put in place to do a good job handling that, I think we should be consistent in that. So again, I like what's been put forward. I'm not in favor of changing setbacks again. The voters did approve the 2,000 foot setbacks and 500. I did have a question going back to the one we didn't talk about at all. With the detention pond, that was the concern with the variance. You mentioned that we have one detention pond that is zoned.
I think at least one.
At least one, okay. I just didn't know, is that a normal thing that detention ponds are zoned be public? Is this one specially designated? I'm just trying to understand the situation with that specific detention pond.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit. First of all, the mayor acknowledged me a moment ago, and Trustee Gator actually made the same comment I was going to make, that a rezone is another alternative to adding additional zone districts that allow marijuana uses. And that would go through the planning commission, the board of trustees for final approval. To the question on the public zone properties, staff has not done a detailed townwide analysis of all the public properties. We haven't received that direction, so we haven't undertaken that currently. But from, off the cuff, general knowledge of the town and our zone map, I can tell you that there's a number of properties that are zoned public that have different scenarios. Some are zoned public and are just a detention pond. Others are zoned public that have detention pond plus open space, trails, parks and playgrounds, municipal facilities on them. There's a variety of those instances. We also have a limited number of instances where a detention pond is privately owned and zoned to be public because it's preserving that open space.
Okay.
And we have a number of properties that are privately owned or owned and maintained by an HOA. That's detention, and it's not zoned public. It might be zoned, and there are a couple on the proposed zone map that is actually changing the property that wasn't zoned at all, didn't have any designation to it, and the planning commission recommended zone it the same as the adjacent subdivision. So there are a variety of instances, and each property is going to be nuanced.
Okay.
We have not done a detailed analysis.
No, that answers my question perfectly. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So anybody have any further questions on this issue?
Bringing back questions with detention ponds are to consider open space.
Your point, in my, think about detention ponds, the question was. Detention ponds, of course, came up in thinking about peak public, but the question was about setbacks from. Peak public zone districts, and without changing the 500 foot setback, an option that could be used to. Give a different meaning to that would be to say 500 feet in particular uses, perhaps. And so instead of saying, if the board wished to change that, because the detention ponds, many detention ponds are public or their zone different ways. So like a detention pond, like that's not consistent throughout town. But perhaps if you could say 500 feet from parks, recreational facilities, public serving municipal building rather than all peak public, which would then conclude a lot of the properties. And one of the reasons that came to my mind is, as I said earlier, while detention ponds are peak public, so are parks, recreation facilities, the water treatment plant. And when you're thinking about where you want marijuana businesses and what maybe they should be located next to, I'm not sure why there would be a good reason to say a marijuana license could not be within 500 feet of public infrastructure or like the public works garage or something like that.
Okay.
So instead of saying 500 feet from all peak public properties, you could say 500 feet from specific uses, which might be, keep with the intent. If the board wanted to explore something like that, and it would require a lot more work on thinking about what those uses are within P public. I'm not at all ready to write that off the cuff this evening. But that would be another option as you're thinking.
To me, that seems like that would be a great use of Board of Adjustment, because that would be the case that was provided to them for the setback question, rather than us considering every possible public, whatever use.
Right.
And then the question I have about making that blanket statement is a lot of these public spaces, maybe they don't have a trail in them right now.
Right,
but we
But
could,
yes,
and we will want them
absolutely.
to have a trail through them in the future. And I mean, might be part of our master plan when we do finish that. And so we can't say, oh, it doesn't have a trail in it right now, so it doesn't have that. We can't say, oh, it doesn't have a trail, so we don't count that setback, but all those kind of things would want to be considered, and maybe when they did bring it to the Board of Adjustment, we could say, well, here's the plan for trails that would future have it, so take that into consideration when you're trying to consider this property for an exception from the public 500 feet setback versus track F, which was the morning question. Who knows? So, but like all these ones that string right through the middle.
Right.
That we know are planned for trails. So, I don't know.
Well, like ours in my subdivision, I'm looking at it right here, it's on residential, not public. So I
Yeah.
think that there's definitely a variance item that probably would need to be considered on that.
Yeah.
I have one other quick question.
So let her go.
How many total marijuana license applications have been presented to town hall?
My knowledge, full marijuana license applications have been sent to town hall. One was processed and one was returned.
Thank you.
We've only received 2 applications.
Full applications, that's correct. The process begins with requesting a verification of zoning setback. And that goes through Cody's office, and I cannot speak to how many requests for that. But then full applications, we have received 2. Like I
How many
said, one
have-
was processed, one was.
Because your memo only mentioned one, you've only said one several times, so I was just curious, so what was the reason why that one was sent back?
Well, the marijuana ordinance states that the local licensing authority shall receive or perhaps accept and act upon an application only after the zoning verification. So in that case, they submitted an application but hadn't already gone through the zoning verification process. We then processed their zoning verification form, which was with the application, and it was denied, so the request was sent back. It did not meet the zoning setbacks. And because the local licensing authority has no authority to vary the setbacks, we didn't process the application, we didn't cash the check, it was sent back just as unaccepted. The ordinance and the rules and regulations of licensing authority say it shall be accepted only after the zoning verification.
Okay, but the other, so help me understand the difference between that one and the other one, because the other one went through a much more. Like to annex something into the town and assign it zoning is like, that's a way bigger deal.
But that was all done prior to the application. So when we received the application, all that had already been completed. And it was a complete application that had met that at the time of the submission of the application, met all the zoning setbacks.
So was the daycare brought out before or after the application for zoning was submitted?
When the application for zoning verification was submitted, there was not a daycare license within 2002 that
So
process.
it was purchased before the zoning application was submitted, an annexation agreement?
There, for the property that you're speaking to, there have been multiple zoning and setback verification applications submitted.
I'm not asking about the other ones, I'm just asking about these ones.
I'm referring to the property in question. The property in question had,
I don't want to confuse the situation. It's okay, Cody, I'll get.
Oh.
You answered my question. Thank you. Mr.
Okay.
Kathy. I'll go.
and I misunderstood the question. My apologies.
No further comment.
Before they start going through the process, somebody said they want to open up a marijuana place here. They think they got a place. Can they put that up there and try to get it through to see if it will qualify first, or do they have to own the property first before they can bring it to the adjustments and all that? Just curious.
They have to demonstrate an ownership interest in the property. That might be I own the property, it might be I have a
A
contract
contract,
to,
okay.
to obtain ownership or lease.
So if they can get that passed, if that's part of the contract. Okay, so
Yeah, it's
Right.
likely that there is some contingent offers.
perfect. One last question I got. How often can we bring this stuff back to the board here? Is it yearly, 6 months, as far as like we're reviewing the setbacks now that we can change it? Can we change it back in a year? Can we change it back at any time or what?
If the board desires to make amendments to the marijuana code, we could bring
Do
amendments
it
to
at
the
any
marijuana
time.
code at every board meeting.
I'm just kind of curious on that. Surely we can do that, but that is something.
Yeah.
So, if they come in and we see how everything's just working so pristine, we could change things. But if it's going bad, we can change it the other way, whatever.
Absolutely.
Right.
The board of trustees has the authority to pass ordinances, and this would be an ordinance like any other, so you can change these requirements. Once a license gets issued,
Mhm.
you can't change. Can't essentially
That's
pass a
fine.
law to move them out.
Yeah.
We can't pass a law to
Tell them-
stop the sale of marijuana unless it's done by voters,
You
right?
can't change the ordinance in the setback. I mean, if a license been issued, you couldn't then later change the setback requirements.
To revoke the license.
Right.
Right.
So, but in terms.
But
of
we can
changing the
change it
setbacks,
for future stuff going through.
Absolutely, this
Right.
can all be changed at any time.
Okay.
It can be reviewed. Yeah, whenever.
I have had a lot of my questions satisfied, so thank you, Cody, thank you, Dan, you guys were kind of put in the hot seat tonight as far as questions go. A lot of my questions also came from the public, so, and it gives a chance for people to hear feedback as well, because I know some watch online on Zoom. I would really hope to hear some additional public comment, and I watched our previous meeting
There won't be.
at this next meeting.
At the
So-
next meeting,
Yes.
yes, at the
Yeah.
next
Oh, there
meeting.
will be at the next meeting. Yeah,
It's
okay,
next
yeah,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, so I really hope to hear public comment. I hope to hear-
There's public comment.
Hopefully, I hope to hear also if there's any businesses that are around these areas that have additional feedback they want to offer on this. I think it's huge. And that public comments is additionally definitely something that I think every single one of us as trustees weighs on us. We listen, so I think it'll be great to see the public comment section. It was interesting to hear some of the public comment section from this last meeting, because a lot of them, even though they're all different competing businesses, they all had really positive feedback on what was presented by Dan. The only changes and opinions were the variance issues, but the rest of the additional items you had added to that ordinance seemed like it had support in the residential setbacks being adjusted and stuff like that to account for the other districts. So I'm excited to not say put this behind us, but definitely excited to move forward from where the decision goes.
Is there any other methods of appointing people to the Board of Adjustments? Are those ever elected positions or anything like that?
If the town were a home rule municipality, perhaps there'd be options.
But not
Under
statutory?
the board of adjustment is kind of a creature of state law that's been. appointed by one.
It's a good question.
Okay, I just want to be clear, because we keep talking about the setbacks. We are not changing the setbacks. We are only talking about considering the board of adjustments for considering variances.
Right.
Thank you. I apologize, I have to go. I briefed Brian on some of my goals. Sorry I couldn't touch base with you over the weekend.
See you.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
guys.
Ashley.
And there are no changes, so on this upcoming Tuesday, I will bring forward the ordinance
I would leave it as is.
as is.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any further information that the board would like me to bring forward at the next meeting on this topic?
I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yay.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I do hear from residents between now and then, I will, to the extent I can get that in the packet, so that might be the one update I'll provide.
Okay.
Then I hear from you guys.
When you look at the proposed zoning map, did you point out the examples of the public that are changed to, that are proposed change? Change in the districts? for like the detention bonds?
You're asking, when we bring the planning commission's recommendation on the zoning map, you'd like some additional information on the public zone properties that we're changing?
Yes, can you
Okay,
point out those examples?
I will certainly do my best.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now we're on to, play goal setting. Goal setting. Yeah, we'll take a 5 minute.
Let's take a 5 minute break. Here. Here, Taylor. Diego was able to log in as another user, so make sure you're putting in there. The-
Yeah.
It's go time. Go time. I'm not. I would never. Well, I might actually. Even now that he said.
Now that you said it. Yeah, guys, I don't know, you guys are aware of this, or not, but we're being graced by the presence of Mahela. who
So-
got-
Hey,
Hey,
Thank you.
what is she?
Not saying the best part is that would be other municipalities, but I'm a little competitive.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Press release went out today. The best.
Okay,
Welcome back. Last time I saw you, it was just last year.
No, haven't seen you in a year.
Really feels like it's been a while. So if you didn't have an opportunity to familiarize yourself with your own thoughts, I would encourage you to do that. We're just gonna pick up exactly where we left off, which is finishing the other two categories that we had left. When we met last time, we made our way through the first two sections, fiscal responsibility and infrastructure. And we took that, just so that everybody's on the same page, we took that information, met with the leadership team and kind of disseminated that information through two categories. How would we make this possible? Kind of a yes, this is what we can do right now. And then the no is, we would really love to make this happen, and this is what we think we would need to get there. So that you will discuss in a further meeting, but we need to get to the other two sections so that we can kind of do the same process with the leadership team. We can do that tonight. Last time, you kind of stood around and moved your sticky notes and kind of made some thoughts, and I was taking notes. I would imagine we could do the same thing tonight if that works for you.
Yeah.
I put a table here if you all want to stand around it, or whatever, if you want to stand at that table, that works too. Wherever you want to stand, I'll be your note taker.
Having it laid out was good, so.
Yeah.
Stand over. I agree.
We go first, Mayor. Let's do communication, I like it.
Oh my gosh, well, pardon me. I'm so out of shape. My arms and.
Trying to clean out the that.
You can realize how much.
Oh my God.
Right.
I forgot I have much of work at. It's
There you
upper body or lower body, both of them work for you, if you're not in shape. Make it right again.
There we go. Now, Dave gotta look upside
I
down.
can't probably read anyway. What do we got here? Communication?
So these are all emergency plan and rating. So that is pretty straightforward. I was gonna say, it might make sense for us to kind of combine the ones together that are the same.
Do we want to put all these into one thing, or do we need to?
Yeah, those are all gonna be one, right? Emergency
So do we
plan
wanna
and townwide,
stack it?
yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
We'll feel bad now, we don't wanna-
Oh no, don't ruin it. Oh, you read it.
It's not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we purposely use the blue tape, so do that.
Oh, wait, I don't want to put it, because this one actually has a question on it.
Up here. Quarterly meetings. I think these are really two separate ideas.
What do we mean by inclusive language translation? How do we measure success?
Yeah, so that's like the question when we talk about, are we talking about like providing translation services, or are we going for something else with that? So I absolutely agree, we need to work on something to do with translation. That's something that's been brought up multiple times by different members of the community.
Yeah. Spanish,
Yeah,
Spanish has been the one that's been brought to my attention, but I know that we do have other communities that speak other languages as well, so
right?
I know we've been able to have some functionality on the website, I believe, that allows it to be translated, so that's great, and I think that's more than multiple languages that it can be translated into, so that's not just.
Right.
But just as people come up with,
well, and what does inclusive mean? Does that also mean having things? I hate to say in layman's terms, but in terms that our citizens and community understand, if you're not used to having a standard conversation, or you don't go to all board of trustee meetings. Is that also what inclusive language means, is
Oh, yeah, like put things in. layman's
understandable?
terms.
Yes, yeah. So, well, because I would be the same way back when,
I would say. personally, no. I think but that's just me. I think if you want to get involved in something you want to invest in, it's kind of on you to get yourself up to speed.
How about printed materials, all of those kind of things?
I think like newsletters, things like that, like if we do recaps, that kind of gets that inclusivity.
And we have different systems too, so I'm thinking like recreation, sign up, those kind of things, in addition to utility buildings, billing systems. I don't know if that's available in different languages right now. Our newsletters that come out through, I don't know, some of the systems, I think we use Constant Contact maybe. Versus other, so it's like every stream, every channel offering multiple language options. Texting or text services. So to
You know, it'd be tough to do all the languages. I know with my clients that come in for the Korean or whatever else, they're normally the ones bringing in the translator. So they got people within their community too. So I don't think we need to go too overboard on this because it could be an extremely expensive
Well, Google
situation.
Translate, I mean, makes it.
Right.
So I wonder if there's a way where we can have to sign up for certain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get the community input on that, see if we can get some volunteers for it.
Yeah, so it's.
So do we want to make that a goal?
Yeah.
Is that gonna be a goal or is that gonna be like, once we do the survey deal that we're planning on setting up this year? Is that like a
So,
survey question?
What if we went about it this way and basically create a process by which people can request, hey, I'd like to see more of the town documents in X language. And that way we can kind of start to, and then
Okay,
we have to come up with metrics.
so
you
make
know,
it a goal.
if
to
I
where
say I
they can
want-
request it.
Right, make it a goal that we can at least have, maybe it's a page on the website that says, hey, if you, and that could be translated into as many languages as we can think of reasonably. But that one page where you can then go in and request and say, hey, I would like to have more town materials translated into
I
X
think it
language.
has to be within reason. though.
Well, but that,
Well,
I'm not saying that it will be, but then
Maybe that's.
staff can come up with, okay, we've received, like, so for example, we know that based on the survey, the strategic plan, I think it's 19% of our community is Hispanic. So Spanish is an easy one, like, it's like,
Right.
okay, that's a large amount of our community speaks that language, so that one makes sense. But if we don't know that there's other people here saying, hey, if we start, if we get, I say I want it in Russian, okay, maybe we don't do that, but if we've got 35 people go through and fill out the form saying, hey, we'd really like to have access
Yeah, right.
to the town's information in Russian, then we start to think, well, it probably makes sense for us to start looking at
Yeah.
that.
And you know, something, we could probably get the community to work with that.
Sure.
Again, voluntary, if we need them to translate and do that.
So what's the goal?
Can we write it down as reasonable accommodations for language translation?
There we go.
Because reasonable,
Does that fit the SMART goals we're looking for?
Reasonable
inclusive.
accommodation for translation
inclusive language,
requests.
promote inclusive language.
Yeah, I like I think that's part of it. I think that the part where you get in is. And this was the end I had on the question here is how do we measure success? And that I think comes back to the survey that we've talked about, the community survey. And finding a way to incorporate. I don't know how to word the question.
Well, I get, so,
That'd be
I mean, but
improved
it's like,
access to
it's like,
local government for 60% measured by survey of residents.
Yeah.
So that could also be included in.
so we just
Inclusive
measure by the
language.
survey.
Yeah.
That's all we can do, because
Yeah.
it's not like we have a base point to go off.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Until we have a base point,
right.
how do you judge it?
So is the goal to include a question about language accessibility in our community survey?
I love it.
Yes,
Good, very good.
And then can we put some separate, also a goal for staff is to reasonable, whatever we said, reasonable accommodations for translation.
requests.
And how about being-
Request.
Accommodate.
Reasonable accommodation requests for inclusive
Something.
language.
Yeah.
Translation, well, translation, I think let's be specific, and we're talking about translation here.
Mhm.
But inclusive could be more than just language.
Well,
Yeah.
but. It could be. That's why we're gonna.
That's what I'm saying, well, that's why I'm asking the question, when we say inclusive, what are we trying to get at? Are we trying to get at that? Because there's a difference, and I appreciate the comment, the question of, can we make it simpler? And I think that should be generally a good goal for us, is as much as we can, let's try to put things in straightforward terms. Let's not make it more complicated than we
Yeah.
have to. But at the same time, I don't want staff spending hours trying to figure out how do we.
Right, make an
Simplify things.
ordinance.
Right, I mean,
Read.
an ordinance is an ordinance is an ordinance, and there's certain things that have to be there, and it might be confusing, but that's just what it is. But I don't think that that should be a top priority to make it. And I think it just maybe the priority then is on our end is be ready to help people. If you have questions, tell people, you have questions, come ask me. I read this stuff all the time. Can probably help you understand what it says. So,
Okay, quarterly meetings with town residents to get input on concerns, suggestions they would like town to pursue.
and I think that's we didn't do, I think, the last quarter last year, but we had kind of done that. I think we had two or, well, I guess you count the budget bonanza, we did do
Yes, we
something.
did,
So,
yes.
so I think we had
three.
3 last year. So I think that's definitely something that should be continued.
Is it fair to say 3 then?
I think an ideal world 4, because the
Right,
budget
4
bonanza
months.
is last quarter. So I think first quarter is, I don't know what,
Board.
but I
Community
ideally
town hall.
quarterly, yeah.
And we
So,
do, we lose steam in fourth quarter because we do
Yeah.
the budget bonanza in October, which is actually, we do that for the third quarter.
oh,
It's kind of how.
maybe we
work.
just call the budget bonanza fourth quarter and then maybe do something
Try to do
earlier.
something. Yeah, let's see what we can do.
I'm totally fine with the budget bonanza being our fourth quarter one, and maybe we just try to do a little closer together
Okay.
with the second and third.
Um,
So that's a really good one.
Mhm.
let's make it a goal to have an emergency plan townwide.
Mhm.
Work like with the other agencies too, like Larimer County and Fire. So, yeah, just do an emergency preparedness plan.
This says have a date goal. You want to
Yes,
set a
so
date?
question on this, 'cause I know this is not a new thing. I know we have
So a date,
some portions in process. What would be reasonable dates to say we could have maybe a draft that comes to the Board of Trustees?
so
I'm
that's
looking at Bob because most of our emergency stuff involves their facility.
doesn't, but like, I've been working with like interagencies and whatnot like that. I mean, we're kind of dependent on them.
Yeah,
Like
Yeah,
a
I-
control issue that.
it's
Well-
on,
Is
so
2023, is that fair to say in 2023?
maybe by, second quarter of 2023. Because that way, if I've got a deadline, if we've got to have it
draft of
done,
the
have it
town
completed before, by second quarter, so
By the end of the.
by the end of
second
second quarter.
Like April of this year?
No, by the end
A
of second
draft.
quarter, January,
Right.
March.
So that'd be
April, May,
June.
End of June.
Okay.
draft.
Because if a draft, so that
Yes.
way, if we've got a deadline, then I'm going, because I've
Right.
been requesting these joint
Yeah.
meetings and everybody's like, I'm too busy, and if I go, I say, oh, I've got a deadline for the Board of Trustees, I need to make this meeting happen.
This gives you reasonable time
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
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 yeah.
but that gives us plenty of time.
And we are, I'm assuming we have a lot of pieces on our end already together, so it's
Yeah.
not like we're starting from scratch.
Right.
Okay.
Right, it's just putting it,
Yes,
making it one document.
making it one document. Okay, great.
Improve access to local government for 60% measured by survey of residents.
So
I
that's
think
gonna
that's
be
our
part of the
question.
survey
Yeah,
question.
I think that's our survey question.
So we got that covered.
Now, I guess the only piece on that, do we feel like 60% is way too high of a number?
Way too high,
So what do we say that,
45.
what percentage?
way too high.
Okay. 45,
Of
45 is the safe
to
bet.
say that they have access, it's easy to access their government, whether it's staff, whether it's trustees, whether it's meetings, I mean, it's very broad.
Wait, are people, that's how many people are taking the survey?
No.
No.
The question on the survey is something like, is it easy? Do you consider it easy? Or maybe we have like a scale of 1 to 5,
Yes.
you know, and we're looking for X% or 3 or greater,
Yeah.
saying my ability to get a hold of government or whatever,
Is a 3 out of 5.
is at least, you know,
We want 45% of people to say that they know how to get a hold of someone in their government.
I think it makes more sense if you do a survey and then you do another survey in 2 years.
Yeah,
and
set a
hope it
base.
improves.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you
gotta
can't
have
just make
base.
up a number and say that's, yes, you succeeded or not.
yeah, I mean, we don't know.
Do survey and then plan to have better results within a year.
What's like,
Yeah, I think
Was
it's.
the goal there to gather benchmarks for actionable growth in the
I
future?
mean, it kind of is, but the whole thing is, even though we don't know what it's at right now, if we know that our target is. You know, if we say 60%, we're gonna be working our tails off to make sure that we are as accessible as we possibly, and again, if we don't hit it, then we know.
Yep.
But if we say, okay, our target's 30%, then it's like, okay, well, I don't have to, again, it's not as much of a priority for me. If I know I've got to hit a high number, I'm working my tail off.
Define local
So-
government, does that include the town or is that just us as trustees?
No, that's.
No,
That's
That-
the whole
that
town,
includes
everything.
the-
So I think what I'm getting stuck on is, we are filling it
Oh,
out.
you guys are gonna do that.
So, but I'm like, so I feel like setting the benchmark makes sense.
Okay.
Because and then we have and then we can talk about, well, what might we be missing?
We want to say
Because we don't
70% approval rate?
No, I mean, no.
So here, how we do this, let's set a
Set a
benchmark and internally have a goal of 60%.
Yeah.
So staff goal internally, we would love to hit 60%, but we understand,
We gotta do the survey.
so we gotta do the survey and we'll see where it's
And
at.
then we'll go from
And
there.
again,
Maybe that can be
satisfied.
part of the survey that everyone was talking about, the community.
Yes,
outreach
this is
first.
exactly,
Get
yep,
to that.
that's exactly it, yep.
And they have a question like that in there, that's one of their static questions. So that way we can benchmark against other municipalities
Great.
and municipalities locally, our size, things like that.
That's one.
So
I
that'll
want
be.
to make sure I accurately reflected that. So it was set the benchmark, but I missed the with an internal something
With an internal goal. of
Internal goal of
60%.
60%.
for what?
Of
60%.
60% of
Include
people,
access to
60%
local
of like a positive rating. So,
yeah,
For access to government.
Okay,
yeah.
got it. Thank you.
so I don't know what the question's gonna be, so it's
Right.
Yeah, it'll be. it's
60%
something like
think
that.
we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll know what I mean.
Here we have, community survey, how many people feel we're transparent? What is the goal? And then communication, how are we measuring engagement and communication survey? So,
I think that's part of that survey that we
yeah,
just did.
we'll put that
Cool.
there. Okay, on to increase engagement, and communication with local businesses. Career retention and retirement opportunities.
Recruitment.
Oh, recruitment opportunities.
Not
Businesses.
So hard to read upset.
Workforce, economic development. To create retention and recruitment opportunities for businesses and workforce economic development. Oh, this person writes like my husband, so it's easy to read the scratch.
Should hire someone with that job.
That's what we're hoping. to
I know.
So, I mean,
That's kind of what we do for, as far as the economic development goes,
I mean,
correct?
I think we're already kind of doing that, right? Do we need
So
to-
then
How do we
do we need a
measure?
goal to, what would be a goal? I don't think we need to measure this one. I think the goal would be to get somebody for economic development,
I think the goal is to hire dedicated staff.
right?
Yeah.
And support them well. Yeah,
Because in that job description for the community and business liaison, we talk about business retention, meeting with businesses to, find, be able to retain them. Things like that. I think that job description hits those areas.
Right, but how do we know that we're achieving it for the success of our businesses?
Yeah,
I think that's
That
why
we
it would be
really-
measured.
we gotta wait.
Retention and getting more.
Everything, well, I mean, I guess one's pretty easy, we can see like new business licenses or people that
Right.
have been coming in, is that number going up? I'm assuming we have somewhere a total of businesses or business licenses in the town, now again, that's not perfect because some are home based and all that, but we can generally see is a trend. Are we losing more, are we keeping more, so like those things can be looked at.
We already know staff retention rate numbers, so
Yes,
we
we have
can,
staff
we can
retention.
easily compare to staff as
we
far
have
as
that,
that
and
goes.
and now that there's a new law about business licenses and things that we won't be able to base it based on business
Right.
licenses.
We won't have
No,
to
they
get-
won't have to be
They don't have to be
licensed in the
licensed.
town of Wellington.
That's true,
They just have to be licensed through the state, and we don't have access to a lot of that.
and that's part of it, I think the measurement with that kind of comes back to our, what's happening to our sales tax to some level.
Yeah, maybe that's,
I mean, that's kind of, that was a hard one, because how much of that is the businesses versus more people shopping, that one is hard.
If the goal is to hire a dedicated staff to support this function, then
We're working on it.
by hiring that person by specific dates, is a SMART goal.
Right.
But
So,
can we really expect town staff to have that if you guys aren't getting applications
Well,
for the
so
position?
yes, so this is, and I talked to Trustee about this with regards to finances, if we run into a situation, there are companies out there that will do economic development types things for you on a contract basis. So if we're not getting any, we can go contract a company to come in and do those things. So there is and so we could set a goal, and maybe it's like, hey, if we're just not finding the right individual at that point, we put out an RFP and work with the company to do that until we're able to fill that. So,
All right, so hire,
Yeah, we do have 4 really great applicants for interviewing on Friday.
okay.
I mean,
hire
very
by,
So
highly competitive, incredibly qualified people, which is really scary to have 4.
So hire by in the Q1. Dedicated staff for
Yeah.
this.
And if we don't, then have.
Then we can
Then we can,
contract, yep, contract out with Bears or somebody like that.
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
Smart, done.
Boom. Check. I was gonna combine these
Yeah,
because they were
that
both
works.
business liaison. Event coordinator for events and volunteers, and then we have the first annual volunteer fair. Inclusion of all
Volunteer.
community businesses, including at-home businesses. Sponsor a senior citizen membership. So is that something we want to center as a goal right now?
I would love for a centralized volunteer liability coordination process for the
Isn't
town.
that part of it,
That's all we have.
the business liaison and
Right.
isn't that all kind of what?
That, it'll fall underneath
right.
Okay,
that, but we will still need volunteers.
So
They're
volunteer
gonna-
fair,
Yeah.
let's plan on doing a volunteer fair.
And she's gonna be kind of the
Maybe that
coordinator of
could-
that.
that could be one of
and
our
figure out how
quarterly
to
meetings.
Maximize it.
Maybe that's our first quarter meeting is a volunteer fair,
there you go.
Yeah.
because we need volunteers for the whole year, so.
Yeah,
Like a database of volunteers.
Mhm.
yeah.
That have signed off on.
I don't know if Billy really likes that.
Greg,
Photo and.
All right.
Billy, you're gonna like it.
Yeah.
with the new center, on what we can do and
Yeah.
how-
Thank you.
Probably
Good answer. All good, all good.
Or survey.
Yeah, so is there something geared around the senior center? I know that they did not qualify for a grant. That
Well,
was supposed to be, right?
Yeah, well, nobody got the grant. The county didn't get the money.
Got it, it was
So-
2250,
Yeah.
right? Okay,
And so they have applied for another grant.
okay.
At least I think they've applied already. Kelly, do you remember the date?
I can look it up.
Well, I know that there is an active silent auction going on for them right now to raise money, but there was also 4 businesses stepped in and sponsored their entire membership program for the 2023. So is there?
Something
Is
like
what
that,
they
yeah.
do, yeah.
It wasn't a ton of, it was something they
I
did
like for
every year.
discretionary funds,
I mean,
So, well, one of the,
But they're okay.
I'll pay for half of that.
Dorothy is
out of
not-
my pocket.
right?
Dorothy has not been happy with all of this outreach. It's increased all of her phone calls and things like that. She is not a happy camper.
She called me crying, saying she was so grateful and appreciative.
Wow, okay.
I
That's
was
not
like,
that's
if
not
you
the message
send
we
your
got.
all
so I would say a good goal for the seniors is why don't we try to put together maybe like a joint work session? Because they have their board and invite all their seniors to come and do a joint, so, and we just, that work session is focused around
figuring
the senior
out.
community, like what's going on? What are the issues? What are
Mhm.
things that they'd like to see more of? What are ways that we can support them?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a,
Post joint work session with the senior center by.
Let's, by second quarter.
probably so, yeah,
Yeah.
second quarter, because when we get into third and fourth quarter, we're starting to deal with budget, so that would be a good thing to deal with prior to budget season. Because then if we need to incorporate budget stuff, we can.
Or
do so.
by/within second. quarter.
Yeah,
There are still several organizations that present at, what's the conference?
CMO.
CMO.
That do needs assessments for aging communities.
Mhm.
Have we done any of them?
No. We haven't, but
And I-
that's something we can look at.
I think AARP and then,
AARP.
and,
I know the senior, like. Senior
The one that always presents with ARP,
Yeah,
you know, okay, I can look at my notes and see. But I believe they're free needs assessment, they do it on seven different levels, like walkability,
Yeah.
services, all this stuff. I think that would be a fantastic thing to have results back before we did that joint session,
Oh,
because those would give us targeted areas to discuss.
Sure.
Because it'd be like, services,
Do you
we
have
have none.
Right.
agreed.
Other than,
Complete a needs assessment.
Needs assessment for
Yeah.
senior community.
yeah. And I think they're all the ones they talked about, I think are free,
okay.
so.
So do we want to get clarification before we throw a definitive complete assessment?
I don't think so,
Well,
No, because.
because either way is for benefit.
Yep,
well, just a question of, I mean, if it's like $2,000, $5,000, that's within our board discretionary fund. If it,
Oh,
I'm saying, if we come back and find, and I'm hopeful it's free, I don't know.
Oh, I don't.
But if it's like 50 grand,
Well,
We
that's,
have-
we'll do the staff will do the little
Okay.
breakout again. and-
okay.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect, perfect, great,
Yes.
love it,
Let us
love
know
it.
the cost of.
Send my OneDrive. Cool.
Develop an ongoing
You can
community
send it later.
feedback
We'll
survey
work
tab
on this later.
for on-demand tracking
Yeah, so
of each department,
I'll send you some.
which I think is an actually really good idea.
an ongoing survey fee.
So just a tab on the
Yeah, yeah.
website where people can go and leave feedback
Okay,
about, yeah, about,
I think it's,
Yeah, it's,
Promote.
it goes, and we can rebrand it or send it out differently or something, but it is on our website. We get comments all the time. It's just, there's a pothole on
do
my street,
we,
can we
we
please?
see? any
I did it and I got
comments?
responsive.
Do we as trustees?
Talking about my whole.
Some of that,
The
some
data,
of
the requests, we could put something together.
I'd love to see, like, and not only that, but giving kudos to departments that are receiving
It's a great experience.
kudos, right?
I will tell you my experience.
Some of them will be weird after some people post and they're like, I'd like to remain anonymous.
Yeah.
Okay, well, and that's
Yeah, but
understandable.
we'll talk. We'll
Yeah.
come up with
Yeah.
some way to report out.
okay.
That-
Cause they have all pictures of my house. and stuff.
Specific goal around business, increase what kind, how much.
This was,
That falls under liaison, right?
yeah,
yeah, probably.
And then,
How much
business,
business growth and what increase? So there's the one thing I would say that stands out, I wrote that one, is what type of businesses? Are we trying to attract the Walmarts and Costco's
No.
and things like that, or are we trying to attract small businesses? Do we want to define that, or do we want to leave that?
I want our community to find it in part of that survey.
So,
On what
yeah.
they are wanting.
I say we leave it open for now,
Yep, I think it's the best thing.
and then I got broadband,
Wait, no, increase public trust and financial stewardship.
that's
50%
under
measured by
financial
survey.
that we already, that was already part of our financial goals.
Was it?
Yeah, the idea is on there.
yeah.
Okay.
It's not up there.
I
Okay.
really like that broadband's on there.
Yeah,
That's
I-
gonna make us
I don't.
very.
Well, yeah, I know you didn't. Alongside have work to do.
I can check 3 different communities in this town, Wellington Point, Harvest Village, and myself.
Yeah,
They can all get gigabit with curve right now.
that's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of people can't.
I.
Can
I'm with
all
you
the
on this one.
businesses in town? Can we promote
I'd be
business
willing
growth
to bet
without
90%
broadband?
of businesses in town can get gigabit as we speak, yes. In fact,
So,
Uh-oh.
you can get it to your house.
so I
So the-
am gonna agree with,
It wasn't a request from when I looked through, because I did go back and look at the broadband thing. It was brought up 3 times by our community.
Right, and I am talking about future growth. Promoting businesses and ease of access for them to open a business here,
But these are
And
short
have-
goals, right?
not, these are goals of us.
it's both
I
of
mean,
us.
They were right in
It could go either,
2024 again.
it could be, but, so it's not wrong to have it on, I don't disagree with you.
The Larimer County CIO came up here and we talked about this at the last meeting with Commissioner Paulus, right? One of the things he suggested was that fiber infrastructure in the ground can last for 70 years. I would argue that's not accurate. Most cable providers will not rate their cable past 40 years.
That's great.
I don't know that I agree with that. Not only that, but it cost us 20% of $40 million.
You,
I ain't interested.
how do you know this?
That's what they said.
That's just to go with the broadband that they're thinking about doing for the county.
Yes,
We don't have to go with that.
but how else are you gonna do?
We could put a private company.
Well, there's
But then
private
there's
companies that are
contracts.
already doing that, though. That's what I'm saying.
Right, so the question is, I would agree with Brian, is why, if private companies are already doing it, why do we need to get involved? And I'm gonna be honest here,
No, for the.
the government doesn't typically make things better. And from our standpoint, we are very, I think we as a town work very well, our government.
I'm gonna pause right here. I think this is obviously really important to this group, so it needs to be on here for consideration. So we should definitely make a
Sure.
priority to talk about this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Priority to have discussion on broadband.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, there we go.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very smart.
There you go.
And I have a bunch of information for you guys. I've been attending the budget
with you.
and I have a ton of information for us. So
It's not forcing it. It's not forcing. It's worth talking about. Absolutely.
I think it'd be.
Have the conversation.
All right, anything else on communication?
No.
Nope, that's it.
Planning.
Go
development.
team. I'm so proud.
I want to bring up another major partner in our town is like education. Early education in particular is gonna be a big.
What is this?
Education.
Oh, yeah.
Education partners, so I don't think we have to have a specific goal in mind, but I think that's something.
Education partners need broadband.
There you go.
That's even calling down. On the list.
Identify, promote development of community gathering spaces.
Yay, those are my favorite.
Focus on what?
The cemetery.
Cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
And Ashley wanted to make sure that.
Yeah. I would say, that's a goal, that's an important goal. Planning and development and maintenance of the cemetery, I think should be a major goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree. Is there,
So
how
that
does it
section.
after that goal? We need a review of this. Are you looking to see what's currently being done?
I want to see what's currently being done, what the needs are
Yeah,
and how to best, needs assessment, there you go.
And I think that'll be an easy one. There's plenty of volunteer groups. I know the Legion would be more than happy to
Oh,
go
yeah.
out there.
They probably know more than.
Yeah,
They
we need
do.
to.
Yeah.
Brian, you're not a member, so you shouldn't speak.
Well, you know.
And I was unaware of that.
I can be a member. It's crazy.
Planning what are community gathering spaces, how many and where?
Planning, what are community gathering spaces?
What do you mean by that, John?
When we say community gathering places, what are we talking about? Are we talking about parks? Are we talking about, what defines?
Oh, like a park or a
Is it,
facility or
is this considered a community gathering
Yes.
place? Like, so just understanding, like, what do we mean by that? And then.
What areas are available?
Do we
Is that
need more? And where are we suggesting that they go?
Can we brainstorm real quick what we consider community gathering spaces?
Are we looking at public?
Are we
I think
looking
it's,
Where we're
I
looking
think
at
the
public
question
and
I'm
private.
asking is that I think that should be a goal, is to really define out what we mean when we say community gathering spaces. We say that this is important, and I think we have a rough idea of what some of those are right now. But I think we also need to be able to ask ourselves the questions, okay, what do we currently have? What do we need? And where would we put these ones that we think that we want?
So another needs assessment?
I would say absolutely parks are obviously one though.
Sure.
We can say.
Yep.
So. Promote development of parks, I think would obviously be a community gathering.
Not just.
I think we
parks.
identify,
Like pros.
classify.
Yeah, but in.
Nobody already has the classification, the P, right?
The public.
I don't think the detention pond is.
When the water comes in and I can fish.
Yeah.
I think so, because it's gonna be outside, it's not just, I mean, like, we can talk about Leaper Center, that would be. an
But I
example
think
of
that
a
that's
gathered
totally
place.
different, because we're looking at master plan and parks master plan, so
Yeah.
would this belong better down here?
Well, I don't think so, because I know one of the things, I think there was just like one or two comments, but somebody else also brought up rec center. Right, that's something that's been discussed as forever out here, is people talk about a rec center and that.
The roads first.
I'm not disagreeing, I'm just saying, I think that we can't just say it's parks and parks master plan, because it's bigger than that. I think that's most of what we have currently would fall under parks. But I think that one of the things that we hear from people is they'd like more options.
I would say anything related to like walkability, improves community gathering spaces, pocket parks, alleys, actual parks.
So what's the goal? Is it a needs assessment? Is it a definition? What is the goal, guys?
I think we need to define it
I
first.
think, I would say, and I don't, I mean, needs assessment sounds good, but because I would say, what if we look at like doing inventory? What do we currently have? And I'm not gonna say a strict, this is what it, but
Doing a public space audit?
Yes.
yeah, kind of, but basically, here are the community gathering spaces, and maybe it's an exercise we as the board do in a work session or something, and
Then how we classify them.
Yes.
and we can come through, we each come on our list, here's all the community gathering spaces I can think of, and we classify, and it doesn't matter whether they're public. I mean, ideally, we're focused on public ones, but we can also incorporate, here's some of the private ones we have too.
Like HOA.
Yeah,
Mhm.
HOAs,
Clubhouses.
houses that are for rent, businesses that rent out facilities.
Well, piece to that is we can also put something like that on the website, because believe it or not, there's still a lot of people in town that do not even know half of the pocket parks we have exist.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
Okay, so
So.
community
that
gathering
is
space
until I start
inventory
thinking about it.
completed by, or when do you wanna?
Second quarter. I say second quarter because I'd like to do a lot of these things before we get into budget stuff, so we're not tying up staff time and then we're trying to do a budget.
Well, not only that, if we need the time for something or look at CIPs for anything. can
Right,
do
we
it at
can
that time, too.
incorporate it into budget moving forward for next
Okay.
year.
Downtown master plan, parks master plan, ADA compliance throughout the town, future and present. That is, what do you guys want to go there?
Only
Do we
'cause-
have an ADA accessible, like, generalized idea of how accessible our town is for ADA?
Kelly?
No, but we have to create that.
Got it. So maybe would it be better to have this and have something like this paired with what you guys have to complete with the ADA? Is that something?
we have to
that's
come up-
better?
Yeah.
There's some, I don't see the sticky note, sounds like there's a lot of things combined in there, like a downtown study, parks master plan.
Let's,
Is that what's,
That's on a different. one.
oh, okay.
yeah, the only thing on that, that's the only thing under parks, and that's
Yeah.
really, I mean, yes. The ADA stuff should be included and incorporated into parks, but that's really talking about, it seems more about the town as a whole.
yeah.
Right, and
Which
we-
really would not be appropriate for the Parks Master Plan.
right, and.
It actually would though, for ADA compliance.
If we're talking about just ADA, but this, if we want to change that, it's not talked about throughout the whole town, then
You
yes,
Say include,
So with this,
to include.
would the goal?
we just
be-
scratch
There you
out.
go.
Yeah,
That works.
that's fine. Yeah,
Yes.
then now it's good. ADA compliance, future and present in the parks, that's part of the Parks Master Plan.
Oh,
And I'm not saying we shouldn't incorporate it to the rest of the town, I'm just saying that should be a different goal somewhere else.
Yeah,
Well, I
it's
think that has to
parks
be a
and
goal.
downtown.
It has to happen.
It has to
No
happen.
matter what, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
We'll have to create Compliance with all areas of the town,
Got it.
so.
I think the goal for this item is that we budget for the downtown master plan and parks master plan in 2024. That's the goal.
Did we not budget for any of that in 2023?
Okay,
Good on
That
that
would be a
budget.
very smart goal, as it is in the budget. for
Got
this year.
yes,
Do we want that in? As, like, this includes this? This isn't a goal by itself?
yes. All right. Consider options for open space and buffers from surrounding communities.
This is a huge one for me.
This would.
Yeah, I had that one too.
I did too.
Yeah, that you guys brought this up at a
Mm-hmm.
work session or a meeting.
Yeah, we need to come up with some sort of,
Safety zone. I hate to call it that,
yeah,
but
like,
like a,
what would it be?
And that's the hard part, because how do we manage that? Because there's the balance of, I mean, like right now, we've got probably what,
is that,
kind of a 3 mile, 2 to 2 mile area between us and Fort Collins. It's just kind of more rural farms and stuff like that. The challenge is either you have a couple of options, you go the route of the town starts becoming a huge landholder and just buys up as much land as we possibly can, and then we just leave it sitting vacant, which is not. a
or
good
turn it into a
plan.
regional park.
We
Right.
look at zoning things so that it can't be anything other than like the agricultural or really low
Right.
density residential. But that really only applies if those things get annexed into the town.
There's also a
they're-
secondary option that includes engaging with those property owners and land trusts that protect the land. Since a lot of it is rural. And they get
Yeah.
huge tax incentives for considering land trusts in those areas. Some of it's already land trusted. If you look up on the map, like my OnX app where we use for off-roading, it'll tell you what is owned under a land trust. My understanding, Fort Collins just bought a bunch of land on the border. Or zoned it into their municipality.
I think a lot of this was kind of acknowledged in the comprehensive plan. So
Yeah.
it might be a nice thing to do a review of that and actually talk to Cody too, based on. When we were looking at the map in general, he was describing the land that's surrounding Wellington and just like by elevations alone, where Wellington can and cannot grow to.
Well, I kind of have that on
It would be
there,
kind
like
of
set
good to know.
stone a growth management area for the
So
town.
Yeah.
that's where I was gonna go. We need an IGA with probably Fort Collins and Larimer County.
Mhm.
Because I know they've talked.
So do we want to
about
make the
side.
open space kind of fall in line with that?
Mhm.
So we have.
An IGA for growth management
For, yeah,
area?
GMA.
So I would suggest before we kind of like have our ideas about that, do a really good work session and
Mhm.
understand like what those
What-
limitations are, where the CSU lands are and what is surrounding Wellington and what's ever gonna never be possible. So we know what those
yeah.
are. And then maybe start brainstorming from there.
Awesome,
So that knocks that one
that
out.
was easy.
This next one is just a blue tape.
Blue tape.
No, it's a small town feel with,
Promote small town feel through responsible growth and sound financial practices.
okay, so business liaison, we got
Yeah,
that
that one's
covered.
done. That one's, we're talking about that T1.
Voting for deputy, that's covered.
Increase LCSO support by 3 officers of
That's
the
the
year.
same,
That's gonna be.
that'll be a
long.
T1 discussion.
Is that a goal of when to achieve it by?
I thought we already.
I
Did we
wouldn't,
set the goal?
Well, we already
Yeah,
set the
yeah.
goal to have the conversation.
Right.
yeah,
So,
I think we need to have the conversation before we set any number goal.
Got it, so
and that would really be more safety. Is that safety part of that goal?
small town through,
A small town feel, it's not safety, no.
I don't know, we have.
well, sound practices, so financially planning for additional supports.
I don't
It's kind of a sound financial
know that-
plan.
I think part of
doesn't
small
really fall
town
under
means
any of the
feeling-
4 major categories really, but we know it's a goal for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just, that's just something we'll know we're gonna be addressing.
Yeah.
And then we can move forward with that. Do we need that as a plan development goal?
It's
I
on your
mean,
calendar.
it's already there.
It's on
right?
your calendor for like that in May, if I
Yeah.
remember right, last meeting in May, and then bring it back to the first meeting in June.
Okay,
It makes sense.
so we'll axe that one. Consider options to consolidate services.
That's Mayor Pro Tem. I don't know.
Did she say anything about that one?
No,
I don't really know what that means.
I'm not positive either.
Say it again.
Consider
Consolidated services.
consolidate services.
Options to consolidate. I don't know, I have no idea. I mean, generally, you're talking about, you know, internal things. So I'm not so, yeah, and I.
So I don't know if this is.
Can we make it a goal to ask the Mayor Pro Tem?
On what date?
Audit and adjust.
And adjust planning practices and codes to promote small town feel through responsible growth and limited restrictions. So this one was mine, and this was more along the lines of some of the discussions that I think we are going to have in a meeting with
businesses.
Cody. With the cost of business licensing,
And that won't be a
limitations
thing
and
this next year.
restrictions.
Yeah, I think we may not have business licensing at all, but,
Well, other items that promote a small town
Yeah.
feel and responsible growth
Yeah,
and
and I
limited
think
restrictions.
as I look at that, I think a lot of, when I look, we talk about small town feel, and it's really hard to define what that is.
Yeah,
And I think as I look at it, a lot of it that we have, that I see, it kind of encompasses this as all. We have to, Wellington has to decide what is it gonna be when it grows up. Are we trying to become Loveland and Fort Collins? Because if you're trying to do that, you need to stop trying to be a small town, because they're not. Or are we gonna say, no, we want to stay an agricultural smaller town community? And if the answer to that is yes, then we have to understand we're not gonna be a metropolis with tons of huge corporations and stuff like that that are employing thousands of people. And it's just, part of that is, we have to make that determination, because we keep, like, we're like straddling the fence. Like, on one side, we're like, we want all
Maybe a
the
survey.
amenities, and maybe that is part of the survey, because on one side, we're like, we want all the amenities at Fort Collins and Loveland.
Right.
But on the other side, we're like, well, we want to still stay this small farming community, and it's like, we can't do both. It's like, because the two are incompatible, and
So survey.
Yeah, survey question.
Survey to residents for.
I don't know how we word, like, it's,
Wants and desires for town growth.
Yeah.
yeah.
Businesses and everything.
I think that's
Like, do you want to be a Windsor?
Do you want to?
Right, or do you want to be a Severance?
Right.
And I don't wanna rain on this parade, but we did a series of like 8 surveys that asked those exact same questions for the comprehensive plan. So we have very conclusive data that
Yeah, we
asks
can
people
pull that
what they
information
want
and go
as
through
our
it.
town.
When's
So-
that survey done? Do you remember?
It was
Just look at the last 2 years.
2020.
So what I would, if you wanted more specific data to that, I would say, what are the amenities that you leave Wellington for?
What do you want to see in Wellington that
Yeah.
it doesn't currently have?
Yeah, what services,
Well, that's-
what stores,
So here's the problem
maybe
with
not.
focusing, the question, it's a great question to ask, I agree with you. Is the issue is that that's half the question.
Mhm.
Because, for example, Eaton has talked about a lot, it's a great community, they've got all these great stuff. Eaton has $700 million of oil and gas tax revenue. It's like, we're a farming community, we'll never have that.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, it would be great to have this, this and that, but it's like, okay, what would necessitate that? And that's the problem, is we just ask the question, everyone say, oh, I'd like to have every store here, I'd like to have a hotel here, I'd like to have hot springs here.
Right.
I'd love to have all these things, but then it's like, okay, in reality. And I think that was a great question that was asked to us a couple of board retreats ago with the prior board was, if you want to be that community where no one has to leave to go to work. You cannot be a small town, you have to be a Fort Collins or a Denver, it just will not, it will not happen if you want to have a small town. To have everyone just work within your town and no one leaves.
Right.
Yeah.
The
It's just
idea of
right.
a survey is you're not going to then give you them 100% of everything asked for. What you'll do is
Sure.
find themes and, functionality. So
Mhm.
if, 50% of the people say, I want a rec center, which is what we've seen in pretty
Mhm.
much every single other survey we've asked for. Then we see, what is viable? When does that happen in our timeline? Those kind of things, because, if somebody's gonna say, I want a bowling alley, I want a
Chinese-
movie
So
theater,
here's the
I want
thing.
this and that, that. But
So
it's-
here's the
Yeah.
thing, are you willing to pay increased
That's,
taxes to receive?
yep, and that's the problem is that's left out of the question.
Right, and that should be.
Do you want this? Are you willing to do this? Should be that question.
But if you're gonna ask the questions of, what do you see as a small town? How do you want it to feel? I mean, we've asked those questions at length, many different ways, and we have wonderful responses that are very conclusive. We would ask them every single.
Well, let's
way.
use those and ask again.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Or
mean,
even just pull the data so we can go
Yeah.
through it.
yeah.
Cause I know we got like the high levels in
Yeah.
the, we didn't get like every response.
Right.
We just got, here's the end result of
Right,
the compilation as we went through it.
Yeah.
I'd
So,
like to know how
maybe
many
we review
people are
that.
committed to a rec center and willing to pay an increased tax to do so.
Well, and that.
I think that would
If
be.
we do that, if that's the direction the board would like to go at some point in time, we would hire a firm to do that for us. That was.
Very
And
targeted.
there's people that do that to make sure that they are moving forward on the ballot question that would be supported by the municipality before the municipality starts investing a lot of money into
Well, this
it.
is just a community outreach question though.
Sure.
Right.
So, but
that
you don't know
moving
what, you
forward.
don't know what the sales tax would be. Is it 2%, 5%?
Well, I want to know if anybody would be willing to increase their taxes at
I
all.
bet everybody was, most people
Yeah.
would be, say yes.
Yeah.
I
well,
think-
it's in essence, it's what the county came up here and did about the transportation stuff. They brought
Yeah.
someone up that, and that was I think it was, did they do that internally or did they hire that out? Jason? It was contracted. Okay, that's what I thought.
Right.
And so they had that and they came to us and said, okay, ask all these questions. And so I think that's what Ms. Gracie
Yeah.
is saying is.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good idea. I mean, we can ask a general question, sure, but I don't know. how good the information back we'll get from just
Yeah.
throwing something out there. But I truly think like our last board, we weren't able to go too far into this because we were trying to get the water plant and sewer plant done. That was like, we
Yeah.
have to get those done.
Yep.
And yes, they'll still have to get done, but that's more or less out of our hands at this point. And I think this is really the question I think that would be wise of us to tackle is what is willing to, because it changes. If we're trying to become that Loveland, Fort Collins, we've got to get we've got to do 2 more or 3 more upgrades. So like, there are a lot of different things that have to happen. If we're saying we want to stay a smaller, more agricultural town, there will have to be things that we have to do without. And so I think however we go about getting to that answer, I think we would do future boards well to start that process of whether it's going through information we already have, whether it's getting more information.
So the
but
question is,
moving
in
forward.
asking that question, how do you secure what they want then? If they want a small town, how do you go about doing
Oh, I
that?
agree.
Do you limit the?
Oh, right, but that's not what we're
limits?
talking
Do you-
about right now.
But, and that's
We're goal
exactly-
setting.
That, yeah, so we're goal setting, and I think you're asking, that's the right question, because there are sacrifices if we say we want to stay a small agricultural town. There are things you have to do that. I don't know how we write a goal around beginning that process.
You guys already have a plan for limiting building permits this year based on water anyway, right?
That's what it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Until the plant's done.
Yeah.
Right, is it
70-ish.
ongoing?
Right.
It's 100.
That's
Maybe,
that is
maybe the question should be,
What is our projection of growth in the next 20 years? I think you guys got that, don't you? We're gonna be a community of 30,000 people, is what you're looking at, or what?
I think there's a lot of the information you're asking is in the comprehensive
Yeah.
plan.
Right.
comprehensive.
Yeah, and
42,000.
42?
The comprehensive plan identified that if there were no changes made to the growth patterns and practices, we would anticipate based on our historic growth and front range demand that we would be a community of around 43,000.
By when?
Over a 20, 40 year
Okay.
time span. A lot of decision making happens in that timeframe that.
Sure.
To alter,
slow or
the
speed
projected
up
growth.
those projections.
so I guess that's the question.
No, I agree.
What is that the
yeah.
residents projected want of growth?
Right.
I feel like I heard that we might have some of that data related to growth, desires for growth. What I'm hearing, and could be totally wrong, is maybe some brand language or a brand guide related to how we talk about this small town feel. What does that mean to us?
That would be great.
And how we
Yes,
talk
yes,
about that. What I'm hearing is a brand guide.
We
yes,
definitely need that, and then maybe we need to put a goal as we sit down and review the comprehensive plan as a board. And we go through that to see what do we currently have in our comprehensive plan.
yeah,
Maybe going back through some of the supporting data with some of the community responses in more detail. And then,
Brand guide about that.
so maybe that's the goal, is review comprehensive plan and have discussion on
Yep.
direction.
We could do that and then talk about the GMA.
I'd throw
That'd be
out there,
great connection.
I'm sorry.
Right, go ahead.
I'd throw out there too, that I'm hearing a similar series of questions that we also heard during the comprehensive plan process, and it revolves around small town, and we asked that question over and over again with various groups, what does small town mean to you? And there was no definitive consensus.
like,
on that.
right,
It's so hard to define.
And we asked it in a couple different ways. We said, does small town mean geographical area? Does it mean population size? And what we ended up with was feedback on, these are some defining characteristics of what we think a small town means. And there's a word cloud in the comp plan on page 17 that captured, this is what the community feedback defined small town as.
How many people does Windsor have now?
roughly 40.
Okay, so,
35,
and that still has a very unique small town feel to it.
Yeah, they've done a great job.
Yeah.
They've
And
done a
that-
wonderful job.
We love branding.
But, again, I think, look at success and kind of build off of that. And I mean, they got a little bit of everything, but they don't really have any big box stores.
Nope.
No, but they have big industry, but it's like on the
Yeah.
outskirts of
That-
town.
I mean, if we
They-
could
they-
do,
they- That really are.
Kodak
It's
and,
well, Kodak's no longer there.
well, Kodak's not, but yeah, but
Yeah.
OI still there.
Kodak. built that.
Vestas,
Yeah.
Their downtown is.
good,
Yeah.
killing it.
They're downtown, sucks with traffic. I grew up there, so I'm sorry, I'm just saying, if you've ever had to travel downtown Windsor at 5 o'clock, don't plan on getting anywhere super quick.
It could be worse, could be Denver.
Yeah.
All right, is there anything else we need to add to this planning development goals?
A broadband.
No broadband.
Right, the mayor and Brian will be grabbing their gloves out the car. I'll break. It's right.
What does possible growth look like? That's kind of combined with,
Yeah, that's part of our whole discussion. I think reviewing the comp plan. That's a lot of that.
I got a quick question. Water board. Does that even go into this type of a conversation? And,
that's part of responsible growth, and it sounds like that's
and I
represented.
think, it's, that's so important.
Secure 5% future water resources needed for the next 20 years.
For that.
So I think that would be a good place to do a water board. As a
We're
goal.
supposed to be the experts. And, I'm not.
Right.
And it'd be good to have it just like the finance committee.
Yeah, he's like,
Have
yeah.
it,
Just like an advisory board.
Right,
Well,
absolutely.
Water board, right?
What,
Well, I think, do they oversee the utility though?
So
Yeah,
what was the water
Is it
utility
like
board
a district?
was in the
I believe.
This is
parking lot.
to come back in May.
It's Fort Collins, a water district.
Right.
Okay.
And their water board is an advisory board.
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure.
I mean,
Some of them
But-
have like water and sewer boards, utility boards. So this was on the parking lot to bring back
Okay.
in May,
Mhm.
that topic. So
Okay.
it
and
is,
Megan's
it
gonna
is,
bring it up, right?
it is on our list.
Yeah.
Okay,
It is-
good.
It is on our schedule to bring back in May.
Perfect.
I think that's our goals. We're
I think
done.
so, because a lot of it is just combining some of the other ones. The ADA access increased by 30%. That one was part of,
Yeah. That'll work.
planning what defines small town size density space. That's part of that comp plan discussion. Partner with future or previous businesses to explore complaints with the building and planning. That's something I wrote because I have heard a lot lately about it. I don't know how we do that.
Yeah.
Is that a satisfaction survey? You said we have survey tabs
Mhm.
and feedback on the website.
I just wish we heard more, like, I wish people would just be like, you guys killed it. The people that are like, you guys are killing it, aren't saying you're killing it. People are upset, right?
You hear that a lot in planning commission meetings. You hear that a lot. at the
Mm.
planning commission meetings.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I hesitate to do anything for like a survey of a specific department. That's
Right.
my job to work with that department if there's issues and things like that. I can't tell you historically, everywhere I've worked, the building and planning department gets beat up all the time.
Oh, I can assume
Because
so.
people are
Yeah.
unhappy about
Complaints about
everything.
the electrical code, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
there's
sorry,
always,
that is what it is.
Yeah.
so
I
if
have
there's,
complaints.
if there's issues, they need to come to me and let me handle them, under my,
I think that's why.
if that's okay.
I can guarantee you, I sat in meeting after meeting, listening to accolades of Cody constantly, so.
Everybody's, we all have our things and.
I think Cody's a fan.
Yes.
Does that prioritizes business development, helping navigate through the many hoops the town has. I don't know who wrote this one. Town staff that prioritizes.
I'd say that's
That's
the
business
development
liaison.
gal.
So
Right.
that.
Person,
That's
Right.
perfect.
could be a hell workout.
And then
Right.
listen, those
Excellent.
are sticky notes.
Great.
Great.
To wrap us up, this will go back to the leadership team. We'll do the same kind of exercise, and then that information will get sent out in a summary to you all.
Perfect.
And the items that you guys have set out for second quarter for their items that we think that we can do, I will start plugging into calendars because
Okay.
there it's gonna fill up really quick.
Okay.
So we'll get on that right away.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm sending all my documents.
Yes, please do.
Oh, yeah.
You still going to Guyana?
Stop traveling. You're not allowed to go in.
The water board.
No.
Bye.
Fort
Okay.
Collins.
Good, because I was worried about
David was on.
Jim Jones territory. Diana, you never, you know, it's a whole movie.
Really?
Yes, there's a movie.
And it's bad, because like, you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, there was just one with, I'm trying to think who was the, who played, Jim Jones.
Whoa, we're all done.
Yeah,
So
okay.
one item on the agenda.
Oh, yeah, the last thing was just the Board of Trustees planning calendar, and I just, that would always be in your work session packets, as we updated, I will always include it, we don't have to talk about it, it's just for public knowledge and for your use.
It was very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.